All right, so we are live with our first podcast with myself, President Paul of the Gwinnett NAACP, and also our state conference president, the Georgia NAACP state president, Gerald Griggs. Today's podcast is pretty much going to be covering, we're pretty much going to go over a breakdown of some of the myths that the state attorney general put out there that they can't get involved in some of these complaints that the NAACP, specifically our branch, has sent up to them. A couple of those complaints range from some criminal cases, even a violation of what we feel like is a violation of the Open Meetings Act. So we'll go through that. We'll kind of wrap up talking about the big ugly bill that passed through the Congress this past weekend. So we'll wrap things up with that. But first, want to start with a few announcements that we made that we need to go over. So first of all, there is a public service commissioner election for the Democratic Party for the primary runoff. So please, if you are a Democratic voter, take advantage of picking your candidate for the election. The race is not over. There's two candidates left, Keisha Waits, and then we have Peter Hubbard, who is the other candidate. Election starts on Monday, July the 7th. So for those of you who are probably going to be watching this recording on the back end, the election probably going to already get started by the time you see this recording. So go to www.mvp.sos.ga.gov. Again, that's www.mvp.sos.ga.gov. Again, that is a statewide election. So whether you're in Gwinnett County or outside of Gwinnett County, wherever you are in the state of Georgia, please take advantage of voting early in this Public Service Commission. And for those who don't know what that is, those are the people that regulate your utilities, your electric bill, your gas bill, your water bill, the internet access. They have an impact on regulating those companies in terms of, if you're concerned about environmental justice, those are going to be things that they impact. So definitely make sure you get out and vote. Again, this is for if you are a Democratic voter and looking to vote in the primary runoff, please take advantage of going back out and voting for who you want to represent you in that seat come this fall in November on the Democratic ticket for a public service commissioner. Also want to go over a few other announcements. Our general meeting typically is on the second Thursday of the month. So we will, the executive committee has voted to move that meeting to the end of the month because we will be at the national convention. So because most of us will be headed down to Charlotte, North Carolina for our national convention, the meeting has been rescheduled for July 24th, which is the fourth Thursday at 7 p.m. We're still waiting to get confirmation whether we're going to be at the Gwinnett Justice and Administration building, but the meeting will be recorded online. We will make a post, Facebook post, and Twitter post for those of you who follow us on social media to announce whether that meeting will also be in person as well, like it typically is. We'll follow back up with you on whether that is in person, but it has been moved to July 24th at 7 p.m. and it's to be determined whether that'll be just a strictly virtual meeting or whether that'll be in person. So we will get back with you on that. Final announcement, our Freedom Fund banquet will be held at the Beaufort Community Center on September the 20th, which is on a Saturday from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. So please get your tickets at bit.ly. So it's bit.ly NAACP FFB 2025. Again, it's bit.ly bit.ly/NAACP FFB 2025, or you can just go to www.gwinnettnaacp.com and go to our events page and purchase your tickets off our events page on the website. And then finally, I almost let it slip my mind. The first Sunday in August, we will be having our back to school drive where your kids can get backpacks and school supplies for your kids. So please make sure you go to our website and register for that as well. That we only accept a registration for those backpacks so that we can make sure people are not hoarding school supplies and backpacks. So please go to our website to register. It is free to register, but please make sure you go to the website, www.gwinnettnaacp.com, and make sure you register to get free backpack and school supplies. And then all the additional details will be on the website and also on our Facebook and social media pages about where you'll go. So at this time, like I said, I'm turn it over to State President Griggs as we go through each complaint that we sent. We'll start with the case that we sent about the twins, the Lewis twins. That was a case where we felt like things were not on the up and up and how the case is being investigated. Still don't feel like things on the up and up because GBI has made a public statement that they're closing the case. They're still keeping the case open as they wait to decide which items to return to which parents. There is no law restricting them from closing the case while that is still decided, but yet they're still keeping the case open. So President Griggs, you can talk about that as well as talk about what ways the law allows the state attorney general to get involved and do an independent investigation on that case.
Okay, and thank you for having me. It's always great to be with the Gwinnett NAACP on these important issues. And so wanted to get in here and kind of dispel some of the myths that are happening in real time. And if President Paul, you allow me to share my screen, I will pull up the duties of the Attorney General here in the state. So I don't know if you can see my screen yet. Do I need to press? Okay.
Yeah, hit share. Yep.
Present, share screen. Share screen. All right. All right. Can you see it now?
It's coming up. Let me add it to the stage. There we go.
All right. As you can see here, this is the website for the Office of the Attorney General. It's law.georgia.gov, and it just talks about the duties of the Office of the Attorney General. As you can see, the Office of the Attorney General is a constitutional office created by the Georgia Constitution, derives its authority from both the Georgia Constitution and the laws of the state of Georgia. As the attorney and legal advisor for the executive branch, the Office of the Attorney General's duties include providing opinions on legal questions concerning the state and its agencies, which are binding on all state agencies and departments. We'll return to that in a minute. Represent the state of Georgia in all capital felony appeals before the Supreme Court of Georgia. Represent Georgia in all civil cases before any court. Represent the state of Georgia in all cases appearing before the Supreme Court of the United States of America. Prosecuting public corruption cases where criminal charges are filed against any person or business for illegal activity dealing with the state. Initiating civil and criminal actions on behalf of the state of Georgia when requested to do so by the governor, and preparing and reviewing contracts and agreements regarding matters on behalf of the state of Georgia. The Attorney General does not and indeed by law cannot provide legal advice to any private citizens. And so those are the duties of the Office of the Attorney General. And so when we talk about these cases that the NAACP has been bringing, as well as, the local units cases, they fall well within the duties of the Office of the Attorney General. As you saw there, they represent the state of Georgia in all civil and criminal matters. The governor can specifically request them to get involved, and they are in charge of all the agencies of the state of Georgia, as you saw. So when we talk about the GBI, which is an independent investigatory arm of the executive branch of the state government, they answer directly to the Attorney General. And so when we have an opens meeting violation or anything like that, that is the law of the state of Georgia. And if the law is broken, it is the purview of the Attorney General to govern that and potentially to file suit against that agency if they violate the law. Of course, you also have a right as a private citizen to file. But when we're talking about the duties of the Attorney General, that's one of their core duties. And then when we talk about what's happening with the GBI and not releasing the file because they're creating restraints that have nothing to do with their powers to respond to the Open Records Act, that's why it's important for the Attorney General to get engaged and involved. And so we just want to make sure people have accurate information as to what the duties are, what they can and cannot do, and then when you have situations when they're not acting on their constitutional responsibilities, what we can do. One of the things we can do is, of course, continue to raise the issue both in the court and in the court of public opinion but we can also file a writ of mandamus ordering them to do it, which would be a lawful writ filed in the Superior Court of Gwinnett County. It's a civil action ordering an agency of the government to do something. And then the court would determine whether or not the writ is sufficiently specific on the issue, and then decide whether or not to issue an order there. So there are a lot of avenues available to private citizens and to organizations to do this, and we will continue to try to engage them in direct letter writing and conversation. But if it doesn't work, then we'll engage our lawyers. But that's really where the duties are. That's what the duties are. And that's why I'm concerned about the response that we've been getting from the Attorney General, saying they don't get involved in those matters, when clearly on their own website and by the role laid out by the Georgia Constitution, that's their job. So do you have another question on that particular issue, or do we move on to another one?
Yeah, I think just to follow up on what you were saying before we move on is I think it's pretty clear what we're seeing right now is because the state AG is running for governor, he's choosing to take a neutral posture on any issues that may seem, I guess, to him controversial. And I think, for someone that's looking for our vote, next fall, that, we need to remember that, in the primary election in May, because at the end of the day, the government officials are employees of the voters. They work for the voters. And I think sometimes that gets lost on a lot of elected officials. It gets lost on them that, you're an employee. You don't, you're not your own. You didn't put yourself there. The voters put you there. And so I think before we move on, that just needs to be highlighted. I also think needs to be highlighted is that position is up for election now that AG Carr has moved on or is moving on to try to run for governor. And we need to be mindful of who sits in that position that's going to be representing us, especially when we get complaints like what we've been sending up to the AG, and they've decided to take a neutral posture in this matter. And especially when we have a hostile federal government, and we'll talk about that on the back end of things, how important a state AG office is to combat some of the federal legislation that's being rammed through right now that could be harmful to our community. So let's talk about the case with the twins. Well, I think we did touch on that. So let's talk about the case with Jalen Evans Jones. That was a complaint we sent up where we felt like the local DA pretty much chose not to prosecute a case that just didn't make a lot of sense to us as an organization, why she wouldn't, given the fact someone was not only shot through a closed door, but is permanently injured from that shooting. The Solicitor General's office thought that this was a case that should have even been a felony, which is why she escalated it up from her office to the district attorney office. Now, again, the DA had options where either she could have, went forward with felony charges. She could have sent it back to the Solicitor General, or she could have just prosecuted it as a misdemeanor. But she chose to dismiss the case. And I do want to debunk something the local DA. I know we talk about the state AG and debunking a lot of myths, but the local DA said there was no arrest of Mr. Alejandro Corrales Morales, and that's just not true. He was arrested on misdemeanor charges for shooting through a closed door. Once that, and of course, he got out on bond. And then once the case was sent to Lisa Marie Bristow's office, our local Solicitor General, she escalated or had it referred to be escalated as a felony charge. So that was not true. I know when we did our report, we did our press conference, a lot of the news outlets, one of the comments, the local district attorney's office, Patsy Austin Gasson, stated that this was that the person was never arrested. And so it wasn't, I guess she tried to say that it wasn't a big deal, but that wasn't true. The person was arrested by local law enforcement under misdemeanor charges, which was later escalated to a felony by the Solicitor General's office. He got out on bond. And then, of course, the charges was recently dismissed January of 2025 of this year. But yeah, let's talk about the Evans Jones case and how a state AG office would get involved in a case with a local DA may dismiss.
Yeah, so of course the AG is the chief law enforcement officer in the state when it comes to felony criminal matters. As you saw in the duties of the Attorney General, they specifically have jurisdiction to prosecute folks for public corruption, because it would be a conflict of interest for most of the district attorneys. But when a district attorney has made a decision and decides not to prosecute, the AG's office can review the case and make an independent determination, or they can send it to the prosecuting council of Georgia if there's a reason for the local district attorney to recuse themselves and have an independent prosecutor look at it. So, I mean, in this particular case, it seems as though there needs to be an independent prosecutor to at least look at the case to see if there is probable cause. Clearly, there was probable cause to arrest for a misdemeanor, but maybe there are additional charges that could be brought before a grand jury. And ultimately, a prosecutor has prosecutorial discretion whether or not to present it to a grand jury. But Georgia gives a concurrent jurisdiction to both the local district attorney as well as the state attorney general. And so that's what you're asking. And I don't know why the attorney general's office wouldn't at least look at this case or refer it to the prosecuting council of Georgia to make an independent determination of whether or not a special prosecutor needs to be assigned. You know, it's a very troubling fact pattern that I heard about and read in the complaint, and then of course saw the press conference. And so I think at this point, it's definitely necessary for the state's attorney's office, the attorney general, to at least look at this case and see if it would fit the statute of appointing a special prosecutor from the prosecuting council of Georgia.
And my worry is with the case, just to follow up on that, is, I mean, again, we do, like many organizations that's in civic engagement, we do a lot of door-to-door canvassing. I mean, the precedent that the local district attorney, Patsy Austin Gaston, is setting is, let's say one, and I'm not wishing this on any of our canvassers or anybody that's canvassing for any other organization. I'm just only laying out the precedent that's being set. You know, somebody goes knock on the door to educate a voter about voting. They fire their weapon through a closed door. And pretty much the local DA is basically saying, if that person, you know, says, I think I saw that person with a weapon and it was a cell phone, you know, and I fear for my life, she's saying this person can walk and face no consequences. I mean, that's the precedent that's being set. And that's a dangerous precedent to set, not only in Gwinnett County, but throughout Georgia. Now, this turns into a race issue. Let's say this is a white shooter and the person happens to be a black teenager that's out doing door-to-door canvassing. You know, quite naturally, there's going to be an uproar. Quite naturally, the local DA at that point will feel pressure to do something. But that same white citizen can say, hey, you know, you let this last guy off for the similar issue. Why am I? This is reverse racism. So it's just all so many layers to this that I think enough people are not considering, you know, what the downside is to not prosecuting a case like this. And that's why, you know, we went to the local DA to get answers, and we were told to get the hell out, which, you know, is disappointing of somebody that hold that type of office. I think that shows a lack of respect for the NAACP, because again, you're sitting in that seat because of the blood shed by people wearing that NAACP brand across their chest and across their head and in their hearts that fought to put black people in elected office, right? And then for you to take that particular posture when we're just asking about a particular case where a young woman was harmed, she came to our organization, and we're trying to get answers on why you didn't prosecute the case. That just, you know, to me, that just was not only disappointing, it was a little upsetting. I know that really ticked off one of our board members when I told him that story. And this is definitely something we want to keep lifting up and reminding people come election time in a couple of years for that particular DA.
Yeah. And I just want to state, you know, that it's disappointing to hear that was the response. What we have to recognize is these are very emotional issues that people deal with. And the job of the district attorney is to make sure that the law is followed. In cases like this, simply could have put it up to a grand jury. Grand jury could have determined that there was no crime, or it could have indicted, and then there would have been an immunity hearing by the judge to make a determination of whether or not it was in fact self-defense. But I'm not sure how it could be self-defense or stand your ground when the door is closed and fired through a closed door. So it's some real issues around that case. Hopefully the district attorney, after seeing the public outcry, will reconsider. If not, we hope the attorney general or the prosecuting counsel of Georgia will step in, because you're right, it sends a very dangerous precedent, sets a very dangerous precedent in Georgia. There was a situation, I believe it was in Chatham County during the last election, where there was some concern about a young African-American knocking doors in the political season, and a gun was pulled. So there's some issues in Georgia that this could set the wrong type of message. And so that's why it's incumbent upon them to do a thorough investigation and present it to a grand jury, let the grand jury make the decision.
Agreed. Well, I think we kind of hit all three particular complaints from the Open Meetings Act complaint, from the case with the twins, and unless you want to follow with any issue with the twins case, but I think you kind of covered that at the beginning about how the AG can get involved with that particular case, given all the circumstances around it, with GBI already investigating the case. And we do expect GBI to go ahead and close the case. This whole nonsense about waiting for one of the parents to decide which items they won't return. There's no law that's saying you cannot close that case, without those items being returned. So I don't understand why they're taking that posture. If the case is closed, it's closed. That's what you at least told the public. Then let's close it and turn over the evidence to the family, so that we can see and have our people look at it.
Yeah, I mean, the most important thing is to be transparent and turn over the evidence, so we can determine whether or not this was in fact a suicide or something more nefarious. So I think it's incumbent upon the GBI and the issuance of transparency to be open and honest and release the evidence. Like you said, there's no law in Georgia that says you got to give the property back to one parent or the other parent. That's just allowing themselves to play a little gamesmanship as they continue to hide what actually happened in this case. So my hope is that in the next few weeks, they'll turn it over. But I hope they also understand that we are not going to let our foot off the gas on this case. And there are millions of people around this country and actually around the world that are concerned about that particular case and what happens. And so we will keep our eye on that, continue to press forward and support this family and get answers and hopefully get the evidence so we can find out the truth.
Yeah. And then final thoughts before we wrap up on the big, beautiful bill, just some early preliminary thoughts on its passing. What are the impacts it's going to have on Georgia? Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, so I made a couple posts on the big, bold lie. That's what I call it, because we have to be, considerate in our branding and not allow a certain individual to brand this a certain way. But I wanted to pull up some of the facts of what this big, bold lie will do to the state of Georgia. So the big, beautiful bill guts snap to the number of 800 million in cuts to Georgia alone. Work rules and red tape means less food on the table for Georgia families. The food banks are already overwhelmed. Kids and families and seniors will pay the price. Of course, Georgia deserves food security, not starvation. And we also need to talk about Medicaid. So the definition of Medicaid in Georgia: Medicaid is medical assistance program that helps many people who cannot afford Medicare pay for some of, not if not all, their medical bills. In Georgia, you can go to medicaid.georgia.gov and it tells you exactly what the Medicaid programs are here in Georgia. Again, that's medicaid.georgia.gov. It's estimated by experts that 750,000 Georgians could lose health care by 2035 due to the combined Medicaid and ACA subsidy restrictions and reductions that are going to be caused by this bill. And so, one of the things you need to understand is federal bill now mandates most able-bodied adults between the age of 19 and 64 to work 80 hours a month to extend beyond the current work requirements that Georgia already has. And again, Georgia already has work requirements. Georgia's own pathway to coverage work requirement pilot has seen extremely low enrollment. There's about 4,200 of the 240,000 that are eligible that have enrolled. So we're already seeing the lack of sufficient able-bodied individuals who are taking this Georgia pathways to coverage, because most of the people that get this type of assistance are disabled, and so they cannot work. That's the whole purpose of these particular programs, is to help them. The big beautiful bill would lead to significant reductions in healthcare access, like I said, with stricter work rules, cutting provider funding, and losses of federal match dollars. Expect more paperwork, greater risk of losing coverage, financial pressure on opioid clinics and rural hospitals already operating on thin margins. So what does it mean for Georgia? More rural hospitals will close. This bill would disproportionately affect rural Georgia. And the interesting thing about it is most of the congressional members who voted for this bill live in those rural communities where the greatest impact will be felt. And so we got to recognize that the state of Georgia is going to now have to make up for $800 million that are not going to come from the federal government. Now, we do know the state of Georgia has a $13 billion surplus. So the question we need to be asking right now is what the governor is going to do about this, what the state legislature is going to do about this. There needs to be a special session convened before these cuts take place. There's also something that's going to happen immediately. This particular bill empowers the Immigration and Customs Agency to get funds immediately for more of the mass deportations that are happening around the country. So we can see more of that in Georgia. It provides new vehicles, new staff, possibly new detention facilities that look eerily similar to concentration camps. And so we just need to understand what happened in this big, bold lie is going to affect Georgians by the cost of millions, with thousands of people losing their health care, with thousands of individuals that are going to be detained by ICE, many of which are Georgia citizens. We've seen numerous citizens being detained by immigration, customs, and enforcement mistakenly. And so it's going to be a real serious issue now that the big, bold lie, or the big, beautiful bill has passed. It's bad legislation for Georgia, and hopefully our elected officials on the state level will recognize that and release the funding so we don't see drastic cuts.
And I'm going to just follow up with one last thing about it. Peach Care for kids, that's also another Medicaid program for uninsured children. That's going to be part of those cuts. Like I said, this bill is going to do some serious damage if the state legislature and the governor does not respond. Again, a couple of things I want to point out that I noticed in the bill, and we'll have a larger forum where we get into a deeper dive on this, but I do want to touch on a few things that I both heard and read that I took some notes on. It's going to be a huge shift in public funding from these schools into private vouchers. I mean, pretty much, the felon in chief, along with his cronies in the House and Senate, has put private vouchers on steroids. There's estimated to be anywhere between $25 to $30 billion in transfer in public dollars out of the public school system and put into private schools and charters. So again, we need to keep that in mind. Again, that may have to cause our shift in thinking. We may need to start opening up some freedom schools in Georgia, if that's going to be the case, especially in places where we may not have the best public school system, or public school system that's not serving our community. We need to get our hands on some of them dollars if that's the game they want to play. So that's one of the things I wanted to point out is the harmful impact is going to have on our public school system with these shifts in resources. And then there was one more thing that I wanted to, and I'm going through my Word document notes that I took. Of course, the benefits on SNAP. That's going to be huge. They did put up what I like to call, or what people have called, a poison pill, what they call it in sports when a contract balloons to, starts out small and balloons later. So the poison pill for the SNAP benefits will kick in 2027, where they're going to start cutting all of the benefits in SNAP, increasing those work requirements, as State President Griggs stated. And again, this is strategic, right? Because if there's a change in terms of political power from the Republicans and Democrats in the state house and in the federal house and in the Senate, in the United States Senate, the changes are going to be going into effect after the midterm election next year. And so it's going to seem like, oh, these, if the Democrats do take back control of the House and Senate, it's going to seem like they're responsible for these harsh changes when this was something that was implemented now that just doesn't kick in until later. The other thing is the Pell Grants. There's going to be a reduction in Pell Grants. If you're a student that's going to be enrolling for college this fall, you want to go ahead and bump your hours up from 12 to 15 hours now for full time. Because if you're at 12 hours, that does make you ineligible for Pell Grants. That puts, in my opinion, a harsh burden on students who already are working full time or at least minimum part time to make ends meet while they go to college. Now they're going to have to take an extra class in order to be considered a full time student. So again, this is why it's so important to vote. This is why you cannot leave any tool in the toolbox to the side. I know we get out here, we protest, we do that, but we have to vote. From 18 up, we got to go ahead and get out here and vote. And again, the firewall for white supremacists in this country has always been the state legislature. We have to change that. There needs to be the firewall for Black people and every other race or demographic that cares about our common humanity. The state legislative apparatus has to be our firewall against this administration. And so what does that look like? That means we need to be mobilizing in masses in 2026 to elect a governor that cares about our state and cares about expanding Medicaid and expanding Medicare and care about investing those dollars back into the community and not into billionaires. We have to elect a state attorney general that is going to take Trump to court anytime, or the felon in chief to court every time he passes a bill that violates not only the federal constitution, but the Georgia state constitution. We need a state AG. That's going to be, in my opinion, equally as important as who's going to be the governor. We're going to need a lieutenant governor. We're going to need a secretary of state. All of these positions will be on the ballot. Every House and Senate seat will be on the ballot. Andrew Clyde, who flip-flopped, one of the congressmen in Gwinnett County, on his decision to support this bill, along with the other congressman in Gwinnett County, and his name is slipping me, Mike, what is his name? He's
Mike Collins?
Mike Collins. Yes. He supported this bill. There needs to be a price paid. Until there's a price paid for these elected officials supporting harming our communities, they're going to keep doing voting with how they voted. Once there's a price to be paid to some of the decision that's being made, then elected officials will change the way they govern, the way they act. And again, we nonpartisan. So I mean that for Democratic candidates at the local level, as well as state level, as well as Republican candidates at the local and state level. So if y'all been following us, y'all know we hold both sides accountable. So we don't pull any punches on either side. But what I'm saying is, when we got local elected officials, state elected officials that have shown themselves not to be in unison with the community and with what the voters are looking for, there has to be a price paid at the ballot box. Once the people start seeing that there's a price to be paid at the ballot box, then they'll change their tune in terms of how they act when they get in those seats. And so we have to be organized. You need to be joining the NAACP. If you're in Gwinnett County, go to www.gwinnettnaacp.com and join, sign up, come and learn so we can educate you about some of these issues and problems that our community are facing. If you live in any of these other counties, you need to go to your local NAACP website and join. If you're confused and don't know if you got a local NAACP, go to the Georgia NAACP website and click contact us and reach out to somebody at our state office, and they'll let you know which close NAACP branch is in your area and get you connected with them. But this is the time we need to get organized. We need to get involved. We at war now. If you didn't know you was at war, you at war. So either you're going to sit back and take the butt whooping, or you're going to get in the fight and get your head down and join one of these organizations and get involved, because, right now they're coming pretty much for everything, and they've drawn a bright yellow line, and you're going to have to pick a side of which side you're on. You on the side of humanity, or you on the side of these billionaires that want to continue to pillage our tax dollars for their personal gain. So you're going to have to pick a side right now, because there's no shelter rear. Any closing remarks, State President, from you?
Yeah, just to reiterate what you said, we are at a consequential time in our history where history will remember which side you were on. There's no middle. Let's be clear. There are the haves and the have-nots. There are those that want to uphold the bastions of white supremacy, and then there's everyone else who's being attacked and rights are being rolled back. The big bold lie is just that, a big bold lie. It's going to help the 1% and flies in the face of everyone else. My heart goes out to those individuals that lost their lives in Texas, but that was foreseeable. That's what happens when you cut NOAA and the National Weather Service. So now we don't have trusted forecast models, and you get extreme weather events like that one. And we're just going into hurricane season, so you can only imagine what it's going to look like on the other end. We have to be true to what we all believe is the best for America. And what's the best for America is to speak truth to power. It's not to cower in this moment. It's not to say, oh, because children died in Texas, it's not the time to have the conversation on why they didn't have early detection of the storms that were coming. It's time to call it out. Every time a plane falls out of the sky because of the cuts that were done with the aviation department, we got to call it out then. Every time that we go into another country and bomb them and not find any weapons of mass destruction, we got to call that out. There's a serious lack of transparency that's happening in our country, and we have to be the firewall. So if you're not a member of the NAACP, you need to join a local branch, because we need all hands on deck. When there's a protest, you need to be at the protest. When there's a city council meeting, you need to be at the city council meeting. When the state legislature reconvenes, hopefully in a special session, you need to be there. And then when the elections come for the municipal races, and then of course for the midterms and the gubernatorial race and the lieutenant governor race and state secretary of state's race and the AG's race and the PSC races, which are now to run off on the Democratic side, and we'll have the general election in November. You need to be at these places. Listen, you can't sit at home and say, oh, I would have marched with Dr. King, but now you're sitting on the sidelines saying that, well, things will get better some kind of way. We have to be those agents of change. And it starts with the organization that's been doing it for 116 years. We'll be in Charlotte next week talking and strategizing, and we'll be back on the podcast to come and update you on what the strategy is. But the easiest way to get the strategy is to be at the meetings, to be in the place. And so join the Gwinnett County NAACP if you're not a member. I also want you to do me a favor so we can get this message out broader. Like, share, and comment, because this is the new media. This is how we get our message out. You're not going to see this on television. They're going to sugarcoat what's happening with the big bold lie. They're going to make it seem like it helps Americans, but it doesn't. And so help us to get the message out by liking, sharing, and subscribing to this podcast, but also telling your friends and your family to join the NAACP. I've just been appreciative to be allowed on the platform. I appreciate you, President Paul, for having the foresight to use these new methods of media to get the message out. And I look forward to being with y'all very soon in Charlotte.
All right. Thank you again for joining us, President Griggs. As always, being supporting your local branches, doing what you do. Trust me, it does not go unnoticed. As your tenure as state president, always being on the front line of these issues. Definitely want to give much respect to you and the state conference for your support. And again, like State President Griggs has stated, this is the time to get in the fight. You can't say what you'll be doing back in the 60s. And we got to realize this ain't the 60s no more. It's 2025. We got our own issues. We can learn from a lot of the mistakes we made, a lot of things that we did that worked from the 60s, which is why I'm trying to, bring in a book club session to our organization so we can go through a lot of that history, not only with the NAACP, but other organizations that did a lot of organizing work, so we can learn from those mistakes, learn from the things that we did the correct way, and also get a clear picture of the history of this country. If we're not clear about our past, we can't confront the present or build a different type of future. I think a lot of our issue is, especially in the United States, we haven't been real with what our past is as a country. And so now it's time to get real, and we're going to try to definitely bring that reality to the forefront by having a book club done and walking through that history. In the meantime, like I said, please come out. We will have our general meeting, as I stated, that's been moved to July 24th. That's going to be at 7 p.m. We'll decide a little bit later, probably by the end of the week, whether that meeting will be in person or fully virtual. Either way, that information will be on our Facebook page. As State President Griggs stated, please follow us on social media. Please like this on Facebook and share it on Facebook. Please like it on YouTube. We got to, tweak the algorithm. Please retweet it on X. We got to freak the algorithm to get this message out. If you're on TikTok, please share our, video clips on TikTok to get the message out to the people of what's happening in our communities. Thank y'all again for joining us for this podcast, and y'all have a good rest.